I want to thank every American who participated in this election. Whether you voted for the very first time or waited in line for a very long time. By the way, we have to fix that.
That was President Obama speaking the night of his re-election. And the fact that he addressed the voting drama in his victory speech underscores just how much chaos there was at the ballot box. To try and fix that, the Senate Judiciary Committee held a hearing Wednesday on the state of the right to vote. But the partisanship that made this such a contentious campaign issue could make finding a solution just as contentious. Democrats at the hearing argued that things like voter ID laws and early voting restrictions unfairly target minority voters. Republicans insisted that these measures fight voter fraud, but offered no evidence that it's a widespread problem. During the election, the GOP's efforts inspired Nerdland's series This Week in Voter Suppression. Sadly, it could be an eternal series, because though the election is over, the voter suppression effort is not. South Carolina and Pennsylvania have passed voter ID laws that, while suspended by judges for 2012, could impact elections next year. And in some states like Wisconsin and Missouri, Republicans are considering enshrining voter ID laws in their state constitutions. So while some want to fix voting problems, it's clear that others think things are fixed just fine. Back with my panel, Richard Kim, executive editor of TheNation.com, Bob Herbert, distinguished senior fellow at Demos. Joining the panel now, Liz Winstead, author of Liz Free or Die, a political satirist and co-creator of The Daily Show, and NBC Latino contributor Raul Reyes. But let's first go to Washington, D.C., because we are joined by Judith Browne Dianis, co-director of the Advancement Project. And Judith, I want to start with you. What do you think is the most important thing that we need to do to reform our elections process?
Well, thanks for having me. We have big things that we have to do. Voters are really fed up with a broken election system and politicians who have tried to manipulate the laws so that people can't participate for their own partisan gain. And so what we have to do to fix this is we need to either go big or go home. And what I mean by that is it is time for us to have national standards around running state and federal elections. In order to get there, we really are going to have a federal law that is passed or a constitutional amendment that will give us these national standards. Do you know that right now we have over 13,000 election jurisdictions in this country that run elections 13,000 different ways? And so that's the part that we have to fix. If we get the national standards, if we make it explicit in our Constitution that we have a right to vote, all else will come from that, including fixing registration, fixing the time that it takes us to vote. So that's the big idea of where we have to go in this country to fix the system.
Right. And Judith, it's a great point that you make, and I've seen that point made before in editorials where they say the problem is that states have less money and resources than the federal government, and then localities have less than the states. And the more you drill down to the local level, the more problems you're going to have. To the point that you just made about federalizing some aspects of our elections, Eric Holder, the Attorney General of the United States, he had something to say on this issue. And what he said was that, quote, by creating a system of automatic portable registration in which government officials use existing databases with appropriate privacy protections to automatically register every eligible voter in America and enable their registration to move when they do, we could not only improve the integrity of our elections, but save precious taxpayer resources.
That's right.
So back again with you, Judith. Do you think that that could be a first step, at least making sure everyone's registered so we get beyond the questions of voter ID?
Sure. I mean, registration really did cause a lot of problems because what happens is if you think you registered, you show up to the polling place, they don't find your name on the polls, that leads to the long lines. There are a lot of people who were disappointed when they found that out. Registration is too hard in this country. And why are we doing that? It's archaic to actually have you have to go down to a particular agency and vote. And if you move, it doesn't move with you. And so we do have to get to the point of modernizing registration, but the problem that we have is that when we do that, we're doing what we should be doing, which is making free, fair, and accessible elections. And not all politicians want everyone to vote. And so that's going to be the obstacle.
Right, and that's a big point. And Richard, I want to go to you on that, because the other issue here is that not only do states have fewer resources than the federal government, in some cases, there are actually officials that have a partisan interest in making it harder to vote.
Absolutely. I mean, this whole thing is around this myth that there is widespread voter impersonation, you know, and the Bush Justice Department looked into this, and they found something like 80 cases in 5 years that were even prosecuted. So it's just entirely a sort of fake problem that was ginned up for partisan gain. My real concern going forward also is that some of the way these laws have been written is, though, to produce the appearance of voter fraud, right? So in Florida, they made these laws that made it very difficult to register voters, right? And so, like, you had to turn your card in within 48 hours. There were reports of mailings that went out to felons that were on banned lists saying you can vote, right? So now what the Republican Party is going to come back with in 2014 is say, look, there actually is voter fraud, because they've changed the way that voter fraud is measured, and they've produced the conditions to make it happen.
Well, Liz, not only have there's this sort of the idea that Richard was talking about, but there was some voter fraud. It just happened to be a bunch of Republicans that got caught doing it. These sort of high-profile cases.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, and that's, to your point, it's just, you know, there was more cases of female prostate cancer than there was of voter fraud in our country. And not to mention, I have relatives in Oregon, and their smug superiority of mailing, it's crazy. They're so happy. They never have any problems. They mail in their vote. They're so excited. Like, and it is confusing. Even me living in Brooklyn, knowing that my vote is going to be fine, I do get a bit of agita going in, because I've lived in California, I've lived in Minnesota, now I lived here. The ballot is different in every state. You look at it, is the thing going to be next? All of that needs to go. People need to be excited and know that their vote's going to count. And how we make that happen is got to be priority one.
And Raul, there was also a good bit of ethnic targeting this year. It's just, you know, we hate to go there. We hate to go there. But there was a little bit, and this time it wasn't people look like me, it was people look like you who were the primary targets.
Right. You know, we saw it in Florida and Texas, and there were also tremendous problems in Arizona. I think it was the Hart Research Group found that people of color, African Americans and Latinos, on average, you waited 2 to 3 times longer, or 2 to 3 times more likely than other voters to wait more than 30 minutes to vote.
Right.
And you know what is very, very troubling right now is that the Supreme Court is reviewing the voter rights, Section 5 of the Voter Rights Act.
Right.
That was used to fight a lot of these suppression efforts, and there's a very good chance that they'll strike it down. I mean, that was used in South Carolina, in Texas with the redistricting, in Florida, and so there's a great danger that they're trying to weaken the Voter Rights Act. So this problem could just get worse. And I do have one big question that I wish someone had asked at these hearings. I want to know, how does cutting back on voting on Sunday, how does that prevent voter fraud?
Well, it prevents the churches from getting involved. We know that's what happens. We're going to get on this, and I know Bob wants to get on this. We'll do that right on the other side of the break. Coming up, a Supreme Court challenge to voter rights. So that's coming up next.
A lot of us are campaign officials or campaign professionals, and we want to do everything we can to help our side. And sometimes we think that's voter ID, sometimes we think that's longer lines, whatever it may be.
So that was Scott Tranter. Right. That was Scott Tranter. He's a Republican campaign consultant, making it plain, as if there was any doubt about how Republicans feel about these laws, that they are meant to confer a political advantage on one party. Bob Herbert, you had thoughts.
Such candor is unusual.
Yeah.
I mean, folks should just understand what is going on here. We've got these big demographic changes in the country. The Republican Party sees it as well or better than anyone else. And so it's in their interest. It's become basically an all-white party. It's a virtually all-white party. There's no indication that that's going to change, as we can tell from the fiscal cliff. So, you know, they want to make it as difficult as possible for Latinos and African Americans to vote, and the fewer that vote, as they see it, the better it is for them. And I think that that's true.
And they're sort of admitting it. I want to show a map there of the 33 states that have actually passed these voter ID laws. And you can just look at that map and see that big sweep across the South. You could take California off the table, and you really are talking about a stranglehold Republicans already have on the Deep South, which they're strengthening with voter ID. But now they're starting to sort of move into these more northern states to try to do it. I want to go back to Judith on that point. And you talked about our needing to federalize elections. What can be done, though, now when these laws are already on the books, in a lot of cases being upheld by a higher court? So it's not as if these laws can be undone. So with 33 states already having voter ID, what do you think are the realistic things that we can do to make voting easier and federalize it, as you said earlier?
Well, I mean, of course, we have the problem of, a Congress that is going to be deadlocked around this issue. The Senate and Senator Durbin will probably try and move something, and there's some good bills pending on the House side. But are Republicans ready? I mean, this is an issue where, the Republican Party, just like on the demographics issues, on immigration, they need to check the pulse of America. Republican voters and Democratic voters are fed up with the broken system. They don't want politicians manipulating their vote because people know this is your voice. And so for them to actually decide that certain people shouldn't vote and we should have long lines. I waited for 7 hours in line, and I'm in Maryland, and I know that is a horrible thing to have to go through just to exercise your right to vote. And so the GOP really needs to check the polls, because clearly 80% of people in the Pew study actually said that they want national standards. And so it's time for us to look at these national standards. But in the short term, I think we'll get some of these smaller fixes. I think people in the states will be fighting against these early voting cutbacks, et cetera. And so we'll have the state fights, but we really need to get Congress on board to move this. And Republicans have got to step up and listen to the voters, because this isn't a Republican or Democratic issue. This is a democracy issue.
Right, but I mean, and this is for the table. I mean, this all makes sense. We all sort of agree with what was just said, but aren't we at risk that as we get farther from the election, people are just going to let this go? That this won't be the top priority. We've got fiscal cliff and all of these other issues. Will we just forget it?
I might have said that before this election. The thing that really surprised me about this election was the way people turned out despite all the voter intimidation.
And probably because of it.
I assumed the African American vote would go down from 2008. I assumed young people, the vote among young people, I was sure that was going to go down. Neither of those things happened. So people want to vote, and the Advancement Project and other groups are fighting really hard. It may not go away.
Right, and Liz, I mean, that is the point, right? I mean, I think because people felt that it was being targeted, that women, younger people, minorities, people voted in higher numbers.
Yeah, I mean, I think women said, if I was on the fence, I'm not. And then they said, if you want to have sex with me ever again, you're going to go vote. And I think that, and they were
is that what they said, Liz? Is that specifically what
I polled? I have data on this. And I think that people went, this is real. The lifestyle that people are living has been under attack. Like it was just like, the common sense became a passion. You never hear the term knee-jerk moderate, but I think knee-jerk moderates came out and said, what the heck? This is insanity. And anything I thought before, I don't even know what these people are talking about.
In addition to Winstead public polling.
Yes.
I do
not get quoted nearly enough.
I know. I do think technology had a role in this. I mean, so for the first time, people were actually taking pictures of these lines. They were posting them on Twitter and Facebook.
Social media.
So you saw that happen in real time across America. And I agree with you, Bob. I think this might be the year that we sort of shifted the politics on this.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we got to go for a little break, but we're going to thank Judith Browne Dianis in Washington. And coming up in our next hour, President Obama's cabinet shuffle. Is he losing the fight before it's even been fought?